They say you'll always remember how you felt on your child's wedding day, but no one tells you what to do when the feeling isn't joy or pride or even nostalgia. It's something quieter, something colder, like the moment you realize the guest list is more curated than heartfelt, like when you notice your name isn't printed in gold on the program, but scribbled in pen under miscellaneous family. It's the kind of feeling that comes not from being forgotten, but from being deliberately edited out. And let me be clear, I wasn't looking for a spotlight. I had already stood in one for decades. I was just hoping for a chair, just one seat, near the front, near my son. But as I sat on the edge of my bed that morning, clasping the bracelet he gave me when he graduated from business school, I had no reason to expect anything would go wrong. In fact, I thought the day would be beautiful. My dress was the same soft gray I wore to the opening of our first Langford Interiors showroom in San Diego. Back then, the press called me the iron hands behind the elegance. I was proud of that, quietly. Matthew, my son, was still in college then. He used to say, "Mom, when I take over, we'll build something even better together." And I believed him, not because I was naive, but because I wanted to. After my husband passed, I had poured myself into our family business and our only child. I scaled back my public role, passed the reins with grace, and told myself this was what legacy looked like. Letting go, trusting what you've built to stand on its own. So when I arrived at the Langford Pavilion, the flagship showroom turned wedding venue, I carried no suspicion, no resentment, just hope. I even brought the signed documents tucked in a velvet folder in my purse. It was the final step in transferring $22 million in Langford stock to Matthew, a gesture of faith, not just in him as a businessman, but as a son. That folder felt like passing a baton in a race I had been running for 40 years. The front entry was crowded with planners, photographers, and Olivia's team buzzing around with headsets and clipboards. I smiled politely and stepped aside more times than I should have of. A young woman I didn't recognize handed me a lanyard. "Vendor check-in?" she asked. I blinked. "I'm the groom's mother." She flushed red. "Oh, I'm so sorry. They didn't give us a list. We thought, never mind, you're probably needed in catering." I laughed lightly. Just a misunderstanding. But something inside me noted it. Just like I noted that the seating chart, beautifully hand-drawn on a mirrored board, listed the Langfords in the second row, with no mention of my name. And the family table had a place card for Olivia's college mentor, but none for the woman who built the building they were sitting in. Still, I smiled. I smoothed my dress. I reminded myself, this is Matthew's day. Don't make it about you. In the dressing room, Olivia looked radiant, camera-ready as always. "Oh, Beatrice," she said with an air kiss that landed somewhere near my ear. "I hope everything's okay in the kitchen. If you notice anything missing, just flag it with catering." "I'm not with catering," I said gently. She blinked, as if confused, then turned to her stylist without another word. I felt a shift, not dramatic, but undeniable, like watching a door close that you didn't even know was open. Downstairs, Sharon, my assistant for nearly 30 years, found me near the corridor. "They assigned you a seat near the rear exit," she said softly, "next to the tech crew." I nodded. She didn't ask if I wanted to make a scene. She knew I wouldn't. That's not how real women work, especially not women like me, who've survived loss, who've built things from nothing, who know that silence can be sharper than any raised voice. I stood by the back window for a while, watching Olivia pose for the pre-ceremony shoot on the grand staircase I designed myself. Her dress caught the sunlight. Her smile was perfect. Her photographer snapped away, adjusting angles, repositioning her like she was the star of a feature spread. And maybe she was. But I remember thinking, where am I in this picture? Not in the frame, not even in the room. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from the estate attorney's office confirming the final sign-off was ready. The $22 million, the stock transfer. All it needed was my call. I looked down at the velvet folder in my purse. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because what no one teaches you in a revenge story is that the most powerful moment isn't when you lash out. It's when you realize you don't owe anyone your silence or your signature. I slipped out the side door and into the back garden. The lavender hedges I planted years ago were still growing wild. I dialed Martin. "Don't release the transfer," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Are you sure, Beatrice?" "I am," I said. "It's mine to give and I'm choosing not to." "Understood," he replied. I ended the call. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I had just changed everything and no one even noticed me leaving the room. That, I thought, was power. And this was just the beginning. I kept smiling. That's the thing about mothers like me. We get good at smiling even when something inside us begins to fold. I stood at the edge of the reception hall, scanning the seating chart again, slowly this time. I wasn't looking for a spotlight, just a seat with my name, a place that said, "You belong here." But it wasn't there. There was no Beatrice Langford in the front rows, not even at the family table. Instead, I found a small handwritten card tucked into the lower right corner of the chart, as if it had been added last minute. Mrs. Langford, vendor support. No title, no role, no relationship. That word, vendor, echoed somewhere between my ribs. I thought it was a mistake. I wanted it to be. But something in me, something older than instinct, knew better. You don't get written in pencil by accident. You get written that way, so it's easy to erase. Sharon found me by the back corridor, near the utility doors. "Your seat's in section D, just past the sound booth," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't apologetic. She knew me better than that. She was just telling the truth. I nodded once. "Thank you." "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, which of course meant I wasn't. When I finally walked into the hall, I caught a glimpse of Olivia adjusting her gown beside the media team. Cameras clicked. A lighting assistant rushed to tweak the angle of the spotlights. Everything felt polished, timed, perfect. Everything, except me. The room was laid out like a magazine spread, and yet the woman who laid the first stone of the Langford Pavilion, the woman who picked the tile, designed the light flow, argued for the ceiling height, chose the lavender for the entryway scent, was seated behind the DJ table, next to a boy chewing gum and scrolling his phone. Someone handed me a glass of champagne. It wasn't mine. I don't even like champagne. I looked down and realized this wasn't the vintage I'd selected for the family reserve. It was a trendy rosé with Olivia's signature scripted on the label, Langford Lavender Rosé. I smiled faintly. She'd rebranded the legacy and cut me out at the root. I sat down slowly, clutching my purse tighter than usual. Inside, the folder with the stock transfer still waited, waiting for a signature, a blessing, a mother's final act of faith. Across the room, Matthew was laughing. His cufflinks sparkled under the chandeliers. Cufflinks I gave him when he landed his first client. He didn't look at me. He looked past me as if I were one of the caterers walking through the crowd unnoticed. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being rewritten, recast, replaced. Tell me, have you ever been in a room where everyone knows your name but no one bothers to say it out loud? Where you built the floor they're dancing on, but they won't even glance in your direction? Let me ask you something truly. Have you ever poured your entire life into someone only to watch them hand your love to a stranger and call it their own? If you have, drop a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt it. That quiet erasure, that thank you that never came, that seat you had to pull up for yourself. The toast began. Olivia's maid of honor told a rehearsed story about how Olivia had always dreamed of marrying someone who built things. I stared down at my plate. The kitchen was warm, warmer than I remembered it ever being. Not just from the heat lamps or the oven, but from the quiet hum of people working. Voices low, laughter muted. I wasn't supposed to be there, of course. Not in the official plan, but somehow, by some quiet design, I had ended up standing by the double doors where the waitstaff came and went, unnoticed. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was there. I was just another woman in an evening dress holding a purse too small for anything but a phone and a pen. The head caterer brushed past me, arms full of stacked plates. She offered me a half smile. "Did they need more over there?" she asked, not looking up. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. She thought I was one of them. Of course she did. I stood there a few more minutes, gripping the edge of the counter for balance, until a younger woman, barely 20 maybe, passed me a folded towel. "You okay?" she asked gently, as if I were someone's aunt who'd wandered too close to the heat. I nodded, just catching my breath. She smiled kindly and returned to her station. The smell of roasted garlic, butter, and rosemary clung to the air. Someone dropped a spoon. Someone else cursed. It felt real, lived in, unpolished. And for a strange second, I felt more at home here, in this humming, crowded kitchen, than I had all day out there under the chandeliers and curated perfection. I leaned back against the wall and stared through the small, circular window of the door. I could see them all, guests in sparkling gowns and sleek tuxedos, raising glasses, nodding at speeches. Matthew stood near the band now, talking to one of Olivia's investors. He gestured with the kind of confidence I recognized too well. I taught him that. Not just the posture, but the purpose behind it. But as I watched him throw his head back in laughter, I saw it clearly for the first time. He had no idea I was missing. None. He wasn't glancing around the room looking for me. He wasn't checking his watch, wondering if I'd stepped out. He hadn't even noticed. And that, right there, broke something. Not with noise, not with drama, just a quiet internal break. The kind you feel more than hear. Like when a bone fractures just beneath the skin, you still look whole, but the ache says otherwise. I looked down at my hands. Steady. Still strong. These hands had built tables and homes, guided contractors through winter storms, balanced budgets down to the last decimal. These hands had held Matthews as he walked into kindergarten, held his back as he sobbed after his first heartbreak. These were not vendor hands. These were mother hands, legacy hands. And yet, here I was, standing beside a stack of serving trays as if I were part of the catering crew, as if I hadn't poured my life into a son who now couldn't even see me in a room full of strangers. Somewhere near the bar, someone began the family toast, a soft clinking of glass. I stepped back from the kitchen door before I had to hear it. I didn't want to know what version of our story they were telling now. I didn't want to hear who they thanked or what they chose to forget. Instead, I walked further into the kitchen, toward the back hallway that led outside. No one stopped me. No one called my name. I think, deep down, they all assumed I was supposed to be going. That's what happens when you've been erased quietly enough. People start helping you disappear without realizing they're doing it. I stepped into the night air and let it fill my lungs. It was cooler out here. The lavender hedges I planted decades ago were still blooming, even under the dim string lights someone had hung for ambience. I could hear laughter from the patio, clinks of silverware, a toast ending in applause. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. One number. Just one. The man on the other end answered on the second ring. "Martin," I said. "Yes, Mrs. Langford." "Cancel the transfer. All of it effective immediately." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. "Understood," he said. "Would you like to issue a formal statement?" No statement. Because the thing about moments like this is, the absence is the message. I ended the call and stared up at the stars, blurry behind the soft wedding lights. So much of my life had been about building a business, building a boy into a man, building a legacy that would outlive me. But I never imagined I'd be the one to have to protect it, from the very people I built it for. And now, with one call, I had done what they never expected. I stopped giving, not out of vengeance, not to hurt them, but to remind myself that love does not mean surrender, that motherhood does not mean martyrdom, and that if they wanted the empire without the woman who built it, then they could try holding it up themselves. I took one last look at the reception from the edge of the lavender path. They were still smiling, still celebrating. They didn't know it yet, but everything had already changed. Then Matthew stood, glass in hand, smile perfectly rehearsed. "I want to thank everyone who made this day so special," he began, "especially my wife, Olivia, and her incredible team for bringing this vision to life. And of course, to the Langford team for this breathtaking space. Pause. Just a flicker of a pause. I thought for a moment my name might follow instead, and to my late father, who taught me about building with purpose. Silence. No mention of me, not a single syllable. The air shifted. I could feel it. A guest at the next table blinked, tilted their head as if to ask silently, "Wait, where's his mom in all this?" But no one said a word. They rarely do. Olivia leaned her head on Matthew's shoulder. A perfect picture, a clean story, a legacy with the inconvenient pieces cropped out. I looked at my reflection in the side panel of the bar, still standing, still composed, but no longer part of the narrative. That's the part that stings the most, not when they erase you, but when they write a new version of history and leave you out of the first draft. I reached into my purse, touched the velvet folder again, and I thought, not today. Not like this. This legacy wasn't built on curated speeches and trendy labels. It was built on hands that didn't tremble, even when they were tired, on backs that stayed straight even when the world leaned heavy, on women like me. This story wasn't over, and from now on, it wouldn't be theirs to tell. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anger, though Lord knows I had plenty of that simmering just under the surface, but because my body wouldn't let me rest. Not after what happened, not after that toast. The one where Matthew thanked everyone but the woman who made sure there was something to thank. The one where my name became a ghost in a room I paid to build. So I sat in the window seat of my suite at the Langford Pavilion, the same suite they used to call Mom's room when the building was still new. Now it was labeled VIP guest number 3 on the key card. At some point, I poured myself a cup of tea. Jasmine. No honey. Just warmth and stillness. I watched the lights from the reception fade out one by one across the courtyard. The last to go was the marquee sign Olivia had installed, the Langfords, a new legacy. Funny how one line can tell you everything and nothing at the same time. A new legacy, built on erasing the old one. At sunrise, I pulled my sweater around my shoulders and walked out to the garden. The lavender hedges had overgrown in some places. Matthew always said I was obsessed with order, but I never liked wild growth unless it had purpose. Now the plants leaned into the walkway, unapologetic, unbothered, and I didn't move them. I stepped right through the mess. I stopped near the trellis, the same one I posed in front of for our first company brochure. I had been 39 then, hair pulled tight, clipboard in hand. I remembered standing there thinking, we built this. We actually built this. Not just a business, a future, a name. I took out my phone again, no hesitation this time. Martin picked up immediately. "Mrs. Langford," he said, "proceed with everything we discussed. All freezes, all retrievals, all restrictions. Effective immediately? Now, no warning." He didn't ask for clarification. That's why I keep him. He doesn't need me to explain things that are already clear. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Begin drafting the withdrawal letter. Not from me. From Langford Design Holdings. No more silent power. No more behind-the-scenes control. I want my exit to be noticed. Just not performed." "Understood. And the board? They'll feel it. That's enough." When I hung up, the phone felt lighter. Or maybe it was me. Back inside, I opened the drawer of the writing desk and pulled out the contract folder. The one I had planned to hand Matthew the day after the wedding, with a ribbon and a handwritten note that simply read, "I believe in you." I tore the note in half and dropped it in the wastebasket. There would be no handoff, no ceremony, no blind faith. Because what I saw last night wasn't just a son swept up in the moment. It was a man who had spent years preparing for a version of success that required me to vanish quietly. A man who no longer believed he needed the woman who built the roof over his head and the brand under his feet. So I made a new list, not of assets or stocks or grants. A list of locks to be changed, accounts to be frozen, naming rights to be revoked, a list of all the places they had used my name without understanding its weight. And yes, it was long. I called Sharon around 8 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. "Already heard," she said. "The press team is sending over a recap of the wedding coverage." "I don't need it. They tagged you as a legacy guest, not even mother of the groom." I paused. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm just stopping. Stopping the giving, stopping the approving, stopping the forgiving." She was quiet a moment. Then, "Okay, then I'll move. Just say the word. Move." We met in the study of the main house an hour later. Sharon brought with her a stack of documents already printed. She knew. She always knew. We went line by line: withdrawal of discretionary privileges, revocation of brand usage, reallocation of the gift trust to a women's initiative fund. Not for Olivia, not for Matthew, not for anyone who had treated my legacy like a decoration. Once it was done, she handed me a new folder. "One more thing," she said. "This one's yours, not theirs." I opened it. Inside was the early draft of the Beatrice Langford Foundation Charter. The logo was simple: a pair of open hands, fingers calloused. I looked up. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Sharon said, "but it's time someone asked you what you need." And for a moment, just a moment, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes after disappointment, not the loud kind people turn into speeches or breakups. I'm talking about the quiet kind. The moment you stop waiting for someone to notice you were missing. The moment you realize your absence was part of their plan all along. That morning, I didn't get dressed for battle. I got dressed for precision. Slate gray slacks, crisp blouse, my hair pulled back in the way Olivia once called severe. I suppose I'd rather be called severe than irrelevant. Sharon met me at the side entrance of the pavilion. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. We walked together to the private archive room, one most people didn't even know existed. It was tucked behind the main conference hall, disguised as a supply closet. The keypad still accepted my code. Of course it did. Matthew hadn't changed it. He probably forgot it even existed. Inside, the air was still, cool. Shelves lined with binders, folders, ledgers, my handwriting all over them. I pulled out the thick black volume labeled Founding Agreements, Langford Interiors, 1986-1999. My fingers moved without hesitation. I knew exactly where to go. Section 12, Succession and Discretionary Oversight. I flipped to page 148 and pointed to the paragraph I'd written myself nearly 3 decades ago. In the event of demonstrated disregard for founding principles or legacy stewardship, the founder reserves the right to revoke discretionary authority and financial access granted to successors, with no requirement of notice or justification. They had never read it. I know they hadn't. If they had, they wouldn't have made this so easy. "They thought your silence was surrender," Sharon said, reading over my shoulder. "They always do," I replied. I handed her a list, already typed, already signed. It included immediate freeze on discretionary budget under Matthew's control, reversal of pending PR funding for Olivia's upcoming design launch, removal of Matthew's name from the signature line of the legacy grant letters, reassignment of the West Coast Development Portfolio to the Langford Women's Initiative. All legal, all mine to do. All things they didn't see coming because they assumed I had already stepped aside. That's the danger of legacy, isn't it? People forget who wrote the rules. They forget that behind every elegant building, every softened color palette, every press release and vision speech, there is usually a woman who stayed up past midnight making sure the invoice is balanced. They think legacy is a spotlight. It's not. It's a filing cabinet with every receipt and every clause they never bothered to read. Back at the estate, I sat in my study and called Martin again. "I've located the 2017 asset restructuring file," I told him. "It includes the licensing rights to the Langford modular line. Olivia's entire branding depends on that name." "And do you wish to terminate the license?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just transfer it." "To whom?" "To the Langford Quiet Women Fund." He didn't even blink. "Noted." I leaned back in my chair. stared at the ceiling, and smiled. Not because it felt good, but because it finally felt like mine again. My name, my work, my rules. By late afternoon, I received 3 emails in a row. A clarification request from Matthew's executive assistant regarding unexpected fund freezing. A ping from Olivia's PR team. Please confirm continued use of Langford name for upcoming campaign materials. And a polite, almost nervous message from the Langford Interior's CFO. We've noticed several internal controls shifting. Are you intending to rejoin in a more official capacity? No, I wasn't rejoining. I was reminding them I never actually left. Later that evening, Sharon brought tea. No words, just a silent check-in. She placed a linen envelope on my desk. They left this with the front gate, she said. No return name. But you'll know. I opened it slowly. Inside was a wedding photo. Just one. Matthew and Olivia standing in front of the Langford Pavilion smiling, and behind them, slightly blurred, I was visible, walking behind the catering staff with a tray in my hands. Someone had circled me with red pen. Underneath, written in Olivia's slanted handwriting, maybe next time just skip the picture entirely. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't feel rage, not even hurt, just confirmation. I dropped the photo into the fireplace without a word. Watched the edges curl, blacken, vanish. Some people burn bridges. I just turn off the lights and walk out. Because when you've built the house, you don't have to scream when they lock the door. You can just take back the blueprint. I thought the silence would feel like defeat. After everything, after being erased from my own family's wedding, after watching Olivia scribble over my name and Matthew pretend I was a fixture instead of a founder, I assumed silence would sting. I assumed it would feel hollow, but it didn't. It felt clean. For the first time in years, I had no obligations, no public appearances, no supporting statements to write for my son's media kit, no emails to proof for Olivia's next design line. I didn't realize how much of my life I'd handed over little by little, until the silence returned, and I could finally hear myself again. I spent my mornings walking the East Garden path, the one they always said was too quiet for guests. That was precisely why I loved it. The lavender hedges were wild and unapologetic, and the bees had returned. I let them. Some things deserve to come back when they're not being chased off. One morning, Sharon brought me a thick envelope from the board. They want a meeting, she said. Of course they do. They're concerned. I smiled without humor. Not concerned when I disappeared, just now that things are missing. She nodded. They want clarification. Let them sit in the discomfort a little longer, I said. It won't kill them. And I meant it. Let them feel the absence. Let them stumble through files I used to manage with my eyes closed. Let them open accounts only to find the access changed. Let them run a brand without its compass. Do you know what it feels like to stop being useful to the people you love and then realize you were never respected, only depended on? Have you ever wondered if they'd still visit, still call, still see you, if you stopped giving? Tell me honestly, if you stopped giving everything, what would be left? If you've ever tested it, comment below. I'm listening. The truth is, when women like us go quiet, the world starts to notice. It started slowly. Olivia's design launch was postponed due to internal restructuring. Her Langford Lavender Rosé website went offline for rebranding. Matthew's investment proposal for the West Coast expansion failed to pass the internal audit. Something about missing oversight signatures. I didn't laugh when I heard. I didn't even smile. I just took another sip of tea and watered the hydrangeas. They began to circle back like bees to a closed flower. Matthew called first, not to apologize, not even to check in. He just asked, "Hey Mom, did something happen with the pavilion accounts? We're getting bounce backs." I told him to check with legal. I didn't raise my voice, didn't explain, just gently, simply redirected him away from me. Then came Olivia, an email this time, crisp and vague. "We're so sorry if there's been any miscommunication lately. We'd love to sit down and realign on brand vision and future collaboration. You've always been such an important part of the Langford legacy." Important. A part. Not the origin. Not the builder, just a reference point they wanted to polish and use again. I didn't respond. Letting silence speak was a new skill, not out of bitterness, just preservation. And slowly, the cracks deepened. Matthew showed up unannounced one morning. Sharon met him at the gate. She doesn't do drop-ins, she told him. I'm her son, he argued, and I've known her longer than you've respected her. He left, not angry, just confused. They always get confused when you stop playing the role they wrote for you. But I had stopped being the background character. I spent that afternoon revisiting my old project sketches, drawings from the early days when my hands were younger but my spine already knew how to stay straight. I pulled out a file labeled Phase 0, Langford Women's Shelter Proposal. I'd shelved it years ago, always something more urgent, always someone else's need, not anymore. That night I called the zoning office, asked about available property near the outskirts of town, a quiet place, near the lake. I told them I had blueprints. I told them I had funding. Because I did. Because now the things I had built for them were being rebuilt for someone else, not out of spite, out of choice. Out of finally seeing that my power was never in being needed. It was in being independent. The first article wasn't even about me. It was a fluff piece in the local Architect Monthly, titled The Next Chapter for the Langfords. A glossy photo of Matthew and Olivia standing in front of the pavilion with their arms crossed like they had built the thing with their bare hands. But in the third paragraph, wedged right between praise for Olivia's timeless aesthetic and a quote from Matthew about honoring tradition, was the line that caught fire. Beatrice Langford, founding partner and original architect of the Langford Pavilion, was notably absent from recent promotional materials and interviews. Sources declined to comment. That was all it took. By the following week, there were whispers in the design forums. A handful of alumni from my old firm started asking questions online. Did Beatrice retire? Is she okay? Why wasn't she at the unveiling? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the thing about silence is, it gets people curious. And when curious people start digging, truth has a way of floating to the top. I watched it unfold from my study, tea in hand, rain tapping lightly against the windows. Sharon kept me updated in bursts. 3 calls this morning, she said one Thursday, all asking for interviews. One from that national podcast, the one with the host who always wears bright scarves. I'm not interested. She nodded. I know. The next week, another piece dropped. This one, less polished, less respectful. Why did Beatrice Langford vanish from her own legacy? No quote from me, no clarification, just speculation, and a noticeable void where my voice should have been. The emails came next, former interns, old friends, even a few competitors. One said, I worked under you in '98. I still remember how you used to eat peanuts at your desk and hum Sinatra while sketching floor plans. Whatever they're doing to your name, it's not right. Another, if you ever decide to speak, I'll listen. But the one that hit hardest was handwritten, sloppy script, no return address. You don't know me, but my mother was in the Langford Housing Program in 2003. She still keeps your photo on her fridge. Just wanted to say, we still see you. I folded that letter carefully and slid it into the back of my journal. That night, Matthew left a voicemail. Hi, Mom. I know things have been a little strange. Olivia and I, we weren't trying to leave you out. I guess we assumed you didn't want the spotlight. You always said legacy isn't about credit. You said that, remember? He paused, swallowed. If there's anything you need or want, I just want you to know the door's open. The door. As if I'd been standing outside, waiting to be let back in. As if the house they were in wasn't mine to begin with. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Martin. Let's move forward with the community parcel, I told him. The lakefront? Yes, but no Langford name this time. Understood. The next day, I sat in a quiet cafe on the edge of town and watched the clouds roll in. Across from me sat Elise, from the first cohort of our architecture mentorship program 20 years ago. She wore her silver hair loose now, and her blazer had a small brooch that looked like a compass. "You didn't come to my wedding," she said softly. "You invited me the same month your mother passed. I thought it wasn't time yet." She nodded slowly. "Still, I wanted you there." There was a long silence, not heavy, just full. "You were the first person who told me I didn't need permission to take up space," she said. "You were the first woman I saw build something that couldn't be ignored." I smiled. "And now they're trying to ignore it." "They can try," she said, "but people are watching." That evening, I walked past the pavilion again. The lights were off. A private event had been canceled. The parking lot sat empty, like a theater after closing night. I stood beneath the arch I once designed on the back of a napkin in 1989, and I looked up, and I thought, they don't even know what parts of me are still holding this place up. But they would, not through press releases, not through speeches, just through the quiet collapse of everything that no longer had my signature holding it together. The first swing of the hammer was quiet. It echoed off the lake like a soft knock on a door I'd been afraid to open for years. The land was still raw, untamed earth, dry grasses, and the smell of pine after last night's rain. No fancy architects, no glossy brochures, just me, Sharon, and a woman named June, who used to clean offices at Langford Interiors before she started her own painting business. I told her what I wanted. "I'm not building a center," I said. "I'm planting a place." She blinked. "A place?" "A place where women sit first. A place where no one gets thanked after they've disappeared." She nodded once and got to work. By noon, the first post went in. It didn't look like much, just a piece of cedar with orange paint still on its base. But to me, it was the beginning of something real. Not a ribbon cutting, not a PR stunt, just ground reclaimed. Not from them, but for me. I spent the next few weeks waking up early, driving to the site with a thermos of black coffee and a notebook that smelled like dust and ink. Every bench we installed, I tested. Every tree we preserved, I wrote about. It was healing, not because it was dramatic, but because no one expected it from me. No one was watching. And that was the gift. Do you know what it feels like to do something for no one else's approval? To build something not to be seen, but to finally see yourself. It was the opposite of being forgotten. It was choosing on purpose not to beg for memory. People started asking, of course, not journalists, just women. Women like me. They came in twos, in threes. Some showed up after hearing whispers from friends. Others came holding silence in their palms like an offering. One woman brought a photo of her mother, a cleaning lady who never got her pension check. Another handed me a manila envelope filled with handwritten poems. She said, "They never let me put my name on anything at work. So I wrote these instead. They didn't ask for validation. They just wanted a place to exist. And that's what we were building. No plaque, no slogan, no Langford name chiseled into stone. Just a kitchen that served hot soup with no receipts. A garden with benches wide enough for grief. A room with shelves for untold stories. June painted the main entrance herself. Pale yellow with soft gray trim. Not for trend, just for calm. When she asked what we were going to call it, I said, "We don't need a name right now." But I scribbled something in my notebook that night anyway. The Quiet House. Because that's what it had become. A house for women who had been spoken over, ignored, outgrown, or edited out of their own chapters. One Sunday morning, I received a voicemail from Olivia. Her voice was brittle, forced polite. "Hi, Beatrice. I just wanted to say we're aware you've been doing some sort of project out by the lake. We weren't sure if it was a public-facing thing or if maybe it was something the foundation might consider supporting." Supporting. The word hung in the air like perfume sprayed after something has already rotted. I deleted the message without saving it, because this wasn't a story they could sponsor. This wasn't an initiative they could plaster their name on. This was mine. Not revenge. Not legacy. Reclamation. One of the women who came that month brought her granddaughter. The little girl held a notebook and said, "Can I draw something?" I gave her my pen. She drew a house with 2 chimneys and 3 wide windows. In the corner, she wrote, in shaky letters, "This is a house for ladies who don't get clapped for." I blinked fast. I said nothing, but I folded the drawing and tucked it into my coat pocket like it was scripture. We weren't building a facility. We were growing something sacred, not a revenge story, but the kind of soft, persistent healing that scares people because it asks nothing from them and still survives. By the end of the month, the benches were full, not with press, not with donors, just women, sitting in the sunlight, breathing, knowing they had finally found a place that didn't require them to explain how much they gave or how much was taken without thanks. I didn't mean for it to get out. One afternoon, a woman from the college came to visit the quiet house. She was quiet at first, just walked through the garden, touched the railings, sat in the kitchen corner with a bowl of lentil stew. Then she asked if she could record a few minutes for her architecture students. "Not an interview," she said, "just atmosphere." I nodded. She filmed the kitchen, the worn wooden table, the way sunlight hit the bench by the window, and then she caught me by accident, placing soup bowls on a tray, hair tied back, humming something I couldn't even name. The clip was less than a minute, but within a week, it had 1 million views. No narration, no dramatic backstory, just a simple caption. She built everything. Then they erased her, so she started again. I didn't even know it existed until Sharon forwarded me the link. My face blurry in the corner, my hands steady, the comment section full of strangers. I'd sit in that kitchen just to listen. You can feel the dignity in her silence. We all know a woman like her. And the one that caught me off guard, she's the quiet kind of powerful, the kind I wish my mother had been allowed to become. The world doesn't need another icon who shouts. Sometimes we need one who simply stays standing. By the next week, an article came out on Medium. The woman behind the quiet house. Why we keep forgetting the builders. No press release, no campaign, just quiet truth, moving fast. Then came the podcast invite, this time from a show that had once fawned over Olivia's launch party. Now the subject line read, "Would love to honor Beatrice Langford's journey on our platform." Honor. That was new. I didn't answer, because I had nothing to prove, and they had nothing I needed. A woman named Harriet showed up at the quiet house one Sunday. Gray curls, corduroy jacket. She stood awkwardly in the doorway until I waved her in. "You don't know me," she said, "but I followed your career since '93. You gave me permission to imagine more." She paused. "Just wanted to see the place where you remembered yourself." Her words stayed with me all day. Tell me, have you ever been somewhere that helped you remember who you were? Before the titles, before the giving, before you got lost in other people's needs? If you have, I'd love to know. Maybe someone else needs to read your story too. A week later, the college invited me to speak at their Founders of Change panel. Sharon smiled as she handed me the invite. "They're calling you a case study in graceful ownership." I laughed. "Is that what we're calling survival now?" She grinned. "Apparently." I didn't attend. I sent a note instead, handwritten. Sometimes the best thing you can teach a room full of dreamers is how to leave quietly and still walk tall. They read it aloud. I heard someone recorded that too. I never saw the footage. I didn't need to. Because now, when people spoke of the Langfords, they paused. They said her name. They said my name, not with fanfare, but with that quiet recognition that cuts deeper than applause. They finally understood that what they tried to replace was the very thing holding it all up. He didn't knock this time. Just stood at the gate with his hands in his coat pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like a boy who'd lost his lunch money. Sharon called me from the kitchen. "He's here!" I didn't ask who. I already knew. I stepped out to meet him. Not because I wanted to, but because some performances deserve a quiet closing scene. Matthew looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just stopped smoothing the edges when I thought of him. He glanced at the quiet house behind me. "This is something," he said. "It is," I answered. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure if you'd see me." You weren't sure about a lot of things. That landed harder than I expected. He looked down, then back up. I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I've been thinking. A lot. About everything. I said nothing. Let him carry the weight of his own words. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It's an offer to reinstate your name as co-founder. We can update the pavilion's charter, the website, public acknowledgement, full credit, everything. I looked at the paper but didn't take it. I already have credit, I said. His eyebrows pulled together. You do? I nodded toward the garden behind me, where a group of women were raking leaves, laughing softly. They know who built this. That's the only credit I'll ever need. He looked over his shoulder, taking in the benches, the climbing ivy, the half-finished mural on the west wall. Olivia said we never meant to push you out, he muttered. I know, I said. You just didn't think twice when you did. That quieted him. I stepped forward, not to embrace, but to make sure he heard me clearly. Matthew, I don't need your apology. I don't need the pavilion, the press, or a plaque with my name spelled right. I paused. What I needed, back then, was to be seen, and what I have now is better. I see myself. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was a time I would have filled that silence for him, softened it, reached out. Not today. You don't have to fix it, I said gently. You just have to carry what you broke and live with knowing it won't be put back the same way again. He gave a small nod, and that was it. No tears, no music swelling in the background, just two people standing in the aftermath of a long-forgotten storm, one rebuilt, the other still drenched. Later that evening, I found the paper he'd left folded on the bench. I didn't open it, just tossed it into the burn barrel behind the shed, lit a match, and watched it curl into nothing. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because the role I played in their story, the good mother, the quiet supporter, the afterthought, was done. Retired. Curtains drawn. And this wasn't the kind of legacy that needed rewriting. It needed releasing. That night, I sat by the kitchen window as the lights inside the quiet house dimmed one by one. The women went to their rooms. The halls grew still. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt like the house. Solid. Still standing. Quiet. But unmistakably, there. I hadn't driven down Oak Ridge Lane in almost 2 years. The turnoff was still easy to miss, just past the broken fence and before the sycamore tree that always leaned a little too far into the road. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as I slowed the car. Not from fear, not even anger, just the weight of memory pressing in all at once. The house stood at the end of the gravel path like a memory caught in amber, untouched, but not unchanged. The porch swing was still there, slightly rusted at the hinges. The shutters needed paint. The roses my husband once fussed over had grown wild and tangled, climbing up the side like they'd been waiting for me. I parked and stepped out. No one came to greet me, which was fine. I wasn't there for them. I wasn't there to reclaim anything, just to remember, just to close a door properly, so I wouldn't keep reaching for it in the dark. I stepped up onto the porch and opened the door with the old brass key still on my ring. It turned easier than I expected, as if the house had been waiting. The air inside smelled like dust and lemon oil. I half expected to hear the kettle whistle from the kitchen, but there was no sound, only the creak of the floorboards under my feet, still familiar in the way old grief always is. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens. How the rooms that once held everything you loved now feel like tight boxes for emotions you outgrew. The fireplace mantel still held the picture of Matthew as a boy, front tooth missing, eyes squinted from too much sun. Next to it, a photo of my husband and me on our 20th anniversary. I touched the frame gently, then turned it around to face the wall, not out of bitterness, just readiness. I walked through each room like walking through an old version of myself. The woman who used to hum while folding laundry, who always made tea before sitting down to write holiday cards, who believed that giving enough would eventually be seen, eventually be returned. But some debts never get paid in full, and some offerings, no matter how pure, are never honored. Still, I had no regrets. Every dent in the hallway wall from Matthew's childhood, every scratch on the dining table, every recipe scribbled in the margins of cookbooks still stacked in the pantry. Those were mine, not to keep, but to release. I opened the back door and stepped into the garden. It had gone wild, grass up to my knees, the bench by the old oak now half swallowed by ivy, but in the far corner, beneath the bird bath, something caught my eye. The stone. The one my husband had engraved for our 30th anniversary. Just our initials and the words, "We built this." I knelt beside it and let my hand rest there. We did build it. And even though I wasn't invited to stay, even though my name had been spoken less and less over the years, even though I'd been moved from pillar to problem, I had been here. And the house, unlike the people, still knew that. Inside, I found the small wooden box I used to keep in my dresser drawer. It still held the letter my husband wrote me in 1987, the button from Matthew's first coat, and the napkin sketch I drew of the pavilion before we ever bought the land. I tucked them into my bag, not to reclaim a past, but to carry the proof that I existed in it. And then I closed every door, softly. I didn't slam anything, didn't linger in the doorway. Just turned the lock, stepped off the porch, and walked back to my car with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need permission to leave. On the drive back, I didn't cry. I thought I might. But the farther I got from Oak Ridge Lane, the lighter I felt, as if some invisible thread had finally been cut, not in anger, but in peace. Because I didn't belong to that house anymore, and it didn't belong to me. But for a long, sacred time, we had belonged to each other. And that would always be enough. Autumn arrived without warning. One morning I woke up and the lake behind the quiet house had turned to silver. The trees, still clinging to their last blush of green, began whispering toward gold, and with it came a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not the stillness of waiting, but the kind that comes after you've already moved through the storm and stepped into clear air. The quiet house was no longer a project. It was a rhythm. The women came and went. Some stayed a few days, some longer. No one needed to explain why they were here. They just came, settled in, found a bench, poured tea, and began to breathe again. One night, as I walked through the garden under soft lantern light, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Someone had hung a small wooden sign on the entry arbor. No one claimed it, but I knew it was one of them. Burned into the wood in soft, uneven letters were the words, "We are not invisible here." I stood there for a long time. Let the cool air move through me. Let the truth of that sentence settle like warm hands on an old ache, because that, more than any article, any retraction, any formal apology, was the thing they could never undo. I had become a landmark, not in their world, but in a world I helped build without permission. In the months that followed, the pavilion quietly shifted. Donors pulled out. Reviews grew colder. Rumors spread, not because I said anything, but because people began to notice the gaps. When something is built by heart and then run by ego, people feel the difference. I didn't celebrate their downfall. That was never the point. But I did feel something settle inside me when I read the headline tucked into the local paper's third page. Langford Pavilion struggles to regain vision after internal shakeups. They never mentioned my name. They didn't have to. Because by then, they all knew. And the ones who didn't, they didn't matter anymore. One afternoon in early November, I sat by the lake with a woman named Clara. She'd been at the quiet house for a month, soft-spoken, eyes like river stones. That day, she sat next to me without speaking for a while. Then she asked, "Did you ever get your recognition?" I smiled. Not from the ones who took it. She nodded slowly, as if she understood something deeper in that answer. "And you're okay with that?" "I am," I said. Because what I've built now wasn't born out of needing to be seen. It was born out of remembering that I was never gone to begin with. We sat in silence, the good kind, the kind you earn. I got a letter from Matthew the week of Thanksgiving. It was short, just a paragraph. No drama, no desperate plea, just this. I think I understand now, and I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm grateful for what you gave, what you built, even if I didn't say it when it mattered. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the others, the drawer that no longer held grief but memory. Not fuel, but compost. Things I had let go, let break down, and turned into new growth. That night, the women at the quiet house gathered around the fire pit. Someone had baked apple cobbler. Another played soft jazz on an old speaker. Laughter, real and warm, floated through the air. No one knew I had received that letter. And honestly, it wasn't important, because I wasn't waiting to be restored. I had already risen. When I stood to leave the fire that evening, Clara caught my sleeve. "Thank you," she said, "for making this place." I placed my hand over hers. "You're the one who made it matter." She looked confused. I smiled. "Because without women like you, this would just be a house." That night, in my room, I wrote one final entry in the notebook I'd kept since the day they stuck me in the kitchen at my son's wedding. They never said thank you, but they noticed when I was gone. And in that silence, I built something that couldn't be edited out. I didn't win by being loud. I won by becoming unforgettable. And now, maybe it's your turn. Have you ever been the one who gave everything, your time, your love, your strength, only to be forgotten when the applause began? Have you ever stood in a room full of people you helped build up and felt like a stranger? You don't need to share every detail. You don't need to relive the pain. But if you're willing, I'd love to know. What did you create in the quiet after they stopped seeing you? What part of yourself did you reclaim, not to prove them wrong, but to remember who you really were? Because sometimes the most powerful revenge story isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's not about getting even at all. It's about building something so honest, so rooted in truth, that no one can ever erase it again. So if this story touched something in you, leave a comment, even just a line, because your voice matters here. And who knows, maybe your story will be the quiet door someone else needs to walk through. We're listening, always.